Wind energy is clean and green, but how healthy is it?
It's like a shrieking noise, 24/7.
If you lose sleep over time, it'll affect your mental health, it'll affect your physical health. This is settled science, this is not speculative.
Living near wind turbines can mean troubling symptoms.
Nausea,
diabetes, hypertension,
dizziness, and vertigo.
heart disease.
As with real estate, it's all about location, location, location.
Stop the wind turbines! Stop the wind turbines!
I'm Anne-Marie McDonald. This Doc Zone looks at the wind rush.
I saw the wind turbines on the ridge line there, and they looked beautiful in a sense. From a distance, they really looked like a triumph of human engineering. They looked like the future.
Capturing the wind. An old idea resurrected by new technology to produce green electricity.
And then as I drove closer, and I got to where the people live there, I thought, well, gee, these homes they seem awfully close to these big machines,
These turbines are huge. They have to be productive. But how well can people and wind farms coexist? There is a wind boom because it works, in some places. In others, wind farms are generating unexpected results. With wind power, are we pushing hard toward a greener tomorrow without fully understanding all of the consequences? What do you see? The key to a green future? An eyesore? Or a threat?
I thought, green energy, wonderful. We're going to help the environment. This is going to be good for everybody. It's going to be a win-win situation. But when you're kept awake one night, okay. You're kept awake 2 nights, okay. Then it's 1 week, and then it's 2 weeks, and then it's 3 weeks, and then it goes into months, and then it's a year. That tells its toll.
Norma Schmidt's house is surrounded by turbines. In 2003, there were only 10 wind turbines in Ontario. By 2012, there were 1,200. And that number is expected to double in the next few years. The government is rushing to reduce the reliance on coal by investing in green energy.
So what we're doing here together is building an exciting new clean energy future for ourselves and our children.
And what could be cleaner than wind? The best locations for wind farms are the open spaces, but the turbines have to be close to the electrical grid. In Ontario, that puts them among family farms, and the turbines have gone up with little research into health impacts. That's created a giant rift between those who support wind power and those who don't. But it's different in the wide open spaces of Alberta.
So this is the birthplace of wind power in Canada. I think around, I'll say around 1990, the first ones went up.
Southwestern Alberta is one of the places where wind works. After more than 20 years, Cowley Ridge still produces electricity. Although at only 660 kilowatts per machine, they are at a fraction of the bigger, newer turbines. This is wind farm heaven. A consistent wind howls out of the Crow's Nest Pass and down across Pincher Creek, where banks of turbines are positioned to catch it. It was a game that Jeff Weremuth wanted to get in on, his own wind-powered retirement plan.
I guess about 10 years ago, I made the decision I wanted to get into a good, sustainable business. Here it is. I guess I'm the wind farmer now. Now we're actually on the level with the rotor. I'm sitting actually right in the main bearing. There's instruments up there that tell it when it's windy and tell it when the grid is connected and when we can put power out. This is stationary, except this surface actually yaws. So it will automatically look for the wind, pitch, and find the optimum angles for everything to get the most power out of it. This is the rotor that actually spins with the blades that actually pitch. This one's 750 kilowatts. When it was installed in '04, it was in the top 10 for biggest turbines in Canada. Now it's not even close, it doesn't even rank.
And the new ones are anywhere from 1.5 to 3 megawatts.
Justin Thompson is the Vice President of Project Development for Joss Wind in Calgary.
So we've gone from 0.66 up to 2 megawatts. So these turbines would have produced enough power for 250 to 300 houses per year. And the new turbines are over 1,000 houses per year in terms of the energy they're producing.
I understand that the big manufacturers are all working on their next generation, which are around 6 megawatt machines. They're going to be huge.
In Alberta, most of energy still comes from coal. And I think often people outside of Alberta assume that a lot of our electricity is hydro, which isn't the case. The percentage coal is going down as more and more natural gas coming online. Wind is still a fairly small percentage, less than 5% of our energy demand, so clearly there's an interest in increasing that.
These are some of the same machines that have been put up in Ontario, but there is so much space out here that they don't need to be placed near anybody's home. As a result, the anti-wind sentiment from back east is non-existent here.
I think the community here is quite supportive. It's a community that's familiar with agriculture, oil and gas, and wind has slowly developed here, and I think it's rolled out in a good way, I would say. Most people I believe that I talk to see it as a net benefit here.
You know, if you have 3 turbines on your land, you're looking at $30,000 a year, which for a rancher or a farmer, that's something that helps to boost your family income.
We're allowed to have a mortgage that is basically paid for by our windmills, and it meant that we could keep our farm in family and as a family farm unit rather than selling off to a larger mega farm or corporation. As far as I'm concerned, they're doing their job. They're producing power for other people. Some of that power came off my land, which makes me feel good. People ask, you know, whose windmills are those? Well, I say they're mine because they feel like they're mine. They're part of our place.
In the Canadian West, the industry grew at a moderate speed. As the technology advanced, more turbines went up. But when the wind farms went into Ontario, they went in fast, and a lot of people weren't ready to accept them.
I would not say, though, that I believe that wind shouldn't happen in Ontario. I think there's probably a way to do it, and I think that it's important to have wind development in Ontario. It's just probably, you know, there were certainly some missteps.
Stop the wind turbines! Stop the wind turbines! Stop the wind turbines! Stop the wind turbines!
The anti-wind movement has been growing in Ontario. There are those who think they're a blot on the landscape and threaten property values.
Hey, Toronto! No turbines! No way!
Others are fighting back against what they see as a technology better suited to the wide open prairie like Alberta, rather than the tight patchwork farmland of rural Ontario.
We go to different communities around this province and make sure our message is being heard loud and clear.
And they are worried about the health impacts that can come with industrial wind farms.
What we need to do is everything we can to raise awareness about this issue.
Bruce County is on the shores of Lake Huron, about 3 hours from Toronto. The Bruce Power nuclear facility has been employing people here for years. Producing electricity is the biggest game in town. So it follows that if any place would be ready to welcome a new form of energy, it would be Bruce County. But that hasn't been the case. The opposition to wind farms is fierce.
I'm surrounded by 110 industrial wind turbines. I was told we will get used to the noise. It is not a problem. It is not an issue. The only issue is NIMBYism. You know, not in my backyard. And I thought, well, I don't have a problem. Put them in my backyard. Put them in my 2 fields. We have 13 acres. No problem.
But pretty soon, Norma Schmidt, who is a retired nurse, recognized that she did have problems.
Nausea, which was very infrequent at first. Ear pressure and head pressure. Much later, dizziness and vertigo. Migraines, although I'd had migraines previously, they were very infrequent, 1 to 2 a year. They became much more frequent and much more severe.
Other people have been showing up in doctors' offices too, and their symptoms have been the same as Norma's.
As a physician, once people start complaining of things, you start looking at what might be causing this. And part of our investigation is we said, well, we'll hold a meeting both north and south and see who comes and what their stories are. Had one of the experts from the Ontario Agency for Health Promotion Protection who came up. He's the in charge of their environmental division, and he said he'd never seen anything like it either. That so many people upset by these things, and very consistent symptoms. We need more information about what is this hazard so we can mitigate it. I'm not against green energy at all, but I don't think we should be injuring people, even if there are susceptible 5 or 10%. We need to know who those people are and protect them like we do on any other hazard that we know about.
As it now stands, the Ontario policy follows the ruling of Dr. Arlene King, the Provincial Medical Officer of Health. King released a report in 2010 that said, "There is no scientific evidence to date to demonstrate a causal association between wind turbine noise and adverse health effects." When it comes to people's health, the wind companies take their cues from the province.
When it really comes down to whether they're sick or not, I mean, we have to defer to the doctors. And there are now many, many reports out there from chief medical officers of Ontario or different municipalities that can't find any physical cause and effect between the machines and these symptoms that people report. So we're really stuck on relying on that.
The wind approval process in Ontario was rewritten in 2009 to make it easier for wind developers. It's still pretty stringent. They need to prove that the turbines won't harm the environment. But there have been no extensive human health studies in Ontario.
When someone comes to me and says, you need to do a health study before you do this, and I say, sure, no problem, I'd love to do that. I'm spending millions of dollars of other people's money to do this. Let's do a health study. What does that entail? That entails getting a control group and studying them and have them willing to study for 10 years to see what their health is. Then putting some wind turbines up and doing the same thing for 10 years. and then trying to understand all the other things that can impact what could affect their health. In 20 years, I won't be here, you won't be here, which means it will never happen. So, health study before a wind turbine. Well, that means do not do it here.
Job number one may be to get the turbines up generating power. But there is only so much space for wind farms and people to coexist in this part of Ontario.
When they get right up into high gear, my ears they go past ringing. It's like a shrieking noise, 24/7.
It'll vary from, the closest one is behind our house, 900 meters behind the bush. And it'll just a hum, hum, hum.
At different times, they sound like different things. They can sound like a jet engine. Can sound like a swoosh, 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 and stop. And you've got to realize if you hear like a sound swish, swish, that's okay. But if you hear a swish, swish, and stop, and a swish, swish, and stop, this is torture.
If you live next to a turbine, there is no volume control, no off switch. Ontario's Green Energy Act was designed to bypass municipalities. The permission to put up a wind farm comes from the provincial government. There are considerable subsidies for wind farm developers, so it makes investing in wind attractive. But it's expensive and complicated for people who are against the turbines to defend themselves.
I think we've built an awful lot of turbines, an awful lot of towers in very little time. So I think people get afraid when things move that quickly and when we haven't had time to really absorb the change. So there's a bit of that going on. There's unknowns about health implications.
Does it make you sick? It's an annoyance. Stress of somebody coming to change the area of your little piece of heaven causes people stress, and stress causes people sick. You know, around the lakeshore here, right now we have 200 turbines within a 10-minute drive of Kincardine or 20-minute drive of Kincardine. They're spread out along the way, but the hospital isn't full of people.
But is Ontario's power grid even designed to carry the electricity from wind turbines?
The grid was set up to take power from a few stationary points. Now we're talking about taking power from hundreds or possibly even thousands of points.
There are some 80 turbines on Wolfe Island near Kingston, Ontario. The island sits right where Lake Ontario drains into the St. Lawrence.
All the wind that's coming across Lake Ontario gets funneled across this spot. These things generate power about 25% of the time, probably, because there's times when the wind doesn't blow, and there's times when the wind might be blowing too hard or in a gusty sort of a fashion, and they just can't get good power out of it.
And that's one of the biggest knocks against the wind industry. Wind farms only generate power part of the time. And what they do generate cannot be effectively stored for use later on. That technology doesn't exist yet. But the appetite for electricity continues to grow. The cities in southern Ontario are rapidly expanding, and the province can't afford to have any lapses in the delivery of power. So Ontario has had to build supporting generating systems like this natural gas-powered plant outside of Toronto. Traditionally, electricity in Ontario has come from three sources. Hydro, mainly from Niagara Falls, nuclear, and coal-fired generators, which are on their way out.
The grid was set up to take power from a few stationary points, say 10, 20 stationary points across the province, and distribute it out to millions of customers. Now we're talking about taking power from hundreds or possibly even thousands of points through the province and going out to millions of customers. It's an immensely complex kind of a problem. You know, power doesn't just flow in any old direction through the wires. It goes from place to place. So you have to plan where it's coming in and where it's coming out.
A new power corridor has gone up from Bruce County to the outskirts of Toronto. 182 kilometers of high-voltage wire with capacity for more nuclear and more wind. Meanwhile, wind developers have plugged into the existing hydro lines to carry the power from the turbines into the wider grid system. But as Warren Mabey says, the increased flow of power from multiple sources could exceed the grid's limits. The power is supposed to travel from a big source like Niagara Falls, through a transformer, and down the line to individual homes. The power is not supposed to hop on board from a wind turbine any place along the line and head back down the other way. But that's what's happening, and it's testing the tolerance of the system. And the variation in noises that come from the turbines is testing the tolerance of the people who live near them.
I'm going to play 3 different sounds. They're all at 80 hertz.
Dr. Michael Nissenbaum.
They're all going to be at the same decibel level. Okay. Which one would you rather spend time with?
Wind turbines emit different sound patterns depending on which way and how hard the wind is blowing. The different characteristics bother people in different ways.
The real question is, do wind turbines cause noise? Yes. Do they cause sleep deprivation? Yes. Is sleep deprivation a problem? Well, of course it is. Well, therefore, we have a completely plausible chain of causation here.
Dr. Michael Nissenbaum is a radiologist and public health advocate. He did a survey of how turbines affect the health of people living near the Mars Hill wind farm in Maine. He asked them if their quality of life had changed since the 28 turbines went up.
And we got results that showed that there was an unequivocal deterioration in people's mental health, a deterioration in their sleep quality, and an increase in their daytime sleepiness the closer they live to wind turbines.
Nissenbaum's survey showed that the people who lived closest to the Mars Hill wind farm reported the most ill effects from the turbines, and those effects decreased in homes further away. But even at a distance of 3 kilometers, definite negative effects were still reported.
So strictly speaking, we don't really know what the safe distances are yet.
Right now in Ontario, turbines are required to be 550 meters away from the nearest house. That is the standard for a lot of regions around the world.
From my understanding of the literature and how people behave near these things, 550 meters, I think I described it as insane, because you know there are going to be people being disturbed by having a wind turbine 550 meters from their house. If you go up to 2 kilometers, which some people suggest, then that will drop the incidence of issues with these things a lot. But you'll still have some people still sensitive at 2 kilometers.
And what they are sensitive to isn't just volume, it's also the rhythm of the noise.
So one is a pure tone, and the others are amplitude modulated at 1s per second and 3 per second. The 1s per second is about what you get from wind turbines. And at least my subjective feeling about it is that the 1s per second is even more annoying than the 3 times per second. It's the basics of the most rudimentary medical education that sleep is a vital component of maintaining health. If you lose sleep over a protracted period of time, it will affect essentially every body system. It'll affect your mental health, it'll affect your physical health, including, in the case of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and so on, early mortality. This is settled science, this is not speculative. And all of this can derive from chronic sleep disturbance.
Dr. Nissenbaum says the symptoms he found in his study group are the same as other doctors have found in other places around the world. The complaints from people who live close to wind farms are remarkably consistent. Another common thread in all these locations is that no one had done any substantive health studies before placing turbines next to houses.
I think we got into a situation where no one said, stop, let's wait a minute. These things are very large machines. They're really big industrial complexes. And maybe we should look at them with the same scrutiny we look at factories being set up or airports or new highways cutting through areas, that we should look at the local impacts and design appropriately before we just license these things up for construction.
Wind turbines make noise. Whether that noise is within acceptable levels is up for debate until more sophisticated measuring systems are used. But what about the sound waves you can't hear?
They get tinnitus, which is a ringing in their ears. They get stuffed up ears. And they get this vertigo, which is a sensation of either dizziness or unsteadiness.
When machines as big as these are put up in a quiet setting, the landscape changes, and so do the sounds flowing on the winds. And some of those sounds can be complex. A new study has determined that wind turbines emit subsonic sound waves called infrasound that can make certain sensitive people incredibly ill.
So you have this conflict where people are assuming the ear is insensitive, and it's not.
Dr. Alex Salt is a professor at Washington University Medical School in St. Louis. He specializes in the physiology of inner ear fluids.
Lots of things create low levels of infrasound. If you're driving your car with the window just cracked open slightly, you can get that woof, woof, woof noise in the car. Sometimes in buildings, you can get bothered by the air duct noise if there's a fault in the air conditioning system. So if the pressure in that building is oscillating up and down slowly, people start complaining of dizziness and of all the symptoms that people are reporting.
Infrasound is below the threshold of most people's hearing, but it still causes cells in the ear to react, and in some cases, that can be very distressing. Dr. Salt says that infrasound needs to be taken seriously by the people who put up turbines.
So ignoring that sound is a bit like visible light, saying, okay, we'll just look at visible light, so go and lay on a beach all day. It's not going to harm you. It's not going to, you won't get sunburnt. Because if you ignore the part you can't see, you're going to come to the wrong conclusion.
The current generations of wind turbines are very large. A 1.5 megawatt machine is taller than a 35-story building.
The big thing that generates infrasound is different wind speeds going into different parts of the rotor. So that what's called turbulent inflow into the rotor makes them generate a lot of infrasound. It's going to disturb their sleep. So if it wakes them up and they can't get back to sleep again, that has serious long-term effects on people's health. They get tinnitus, which is a ringing in their ears. They get fullness, which is sensation of pressure, stuffed up ears. And they get this vertigo, which is sensation of either dizziness or unsteadiness, more like. And all of those things come from, can potentially come from changes in the ear caused by the low-frequency sound.
Taking accurate infrasound measurements is very difficult considering all of the other sounds that exist in the environment. As a result, Salt did his work in a lab using guinea pigs whose ear canals resemble humans. Salt believes more research is needed into the effects of infrasound.
So you have engineers making judgments about health effects and saying there's no health effects. And these people have engineering background and have no concept at all of what the real health effects are. I mean, they haven't come to the scientists who understand the problem better.
In our context in Scotland, wind is something that we have. We're not renowned for having a lot of sunshine. It's a resource that we have, just like we have beautiful mountains and lochs, we have wind.
This is Artemis Intelligent Power in Edinburgh. The engineers here are working on a new super-efficient hydraulic transmission system to replace the standard wheels and cogs gearboxes currently used in wind turbines. Hydraulic transmissions last longer and work better. They will allow windmill manufacturers to make their machines bigger and bigger. This new Artemis hydraulic transmission is designed for a 7-megawatt offshore machine, a machine that doesn't exist yet, but soon will. A 7-megawatt wind turbine will be twice as big as most of the machines already working in the world today.
The rotor diameter, I think, is 165 meters in diameter, and the tower height...
Around about 100 meters, I think.
Yes. It's a very, very big structure. And one thing that will happen as machines get bigger is that the nature of how you plant them, they'll have to be more sparsely planted relative to each other. They'll have to be moved so many blade diameters or rotor diameters apart. And that means that the landscape will be less cluttered.
Wind power is criticized for its high cost and low power output, usually just 5 to 10% of what's required by the utility. But that 5 or 10% is electricity that didn't exist before. It was literally captured out of the sky. That notion alone is enough to make any engineer chase the possibilities.
We have a duty as engineers, I feel, to really try and find better ways. Every year just now, I think the oil that we use, the fossil fuels we use, took around about 1 million years, I think, to accumulate. So it's like we're living off this capital, we're burning the furniture.
Fossil fuels are a finite resource, but the wind can blow forever. So why not build bigger machines to harvest the energy? At 6 megawatts, this prototype wind turbine is currently one of the largest in the world. If you were standing next to it on a windy day, the noise would be significant. Coming up next.
I think it's a shame because they are spoiling it for the wind industry, because this gives the wind industry a bad reputation.
Are these giant turbines located where they should be? The North Sea, 30 kilometers off the coast of Denmark. The Danes are among the world's pioneers in wind power. They have a small country and a lot of wind. They were also the first to take their wind farms offshore. This is the Horns Rev project. Horns Rev means Horns Reef. The turbine pilings are embedded into the rock only 9 meters below the surface. All of the power gets carried to land by an undersea cable. Offshore turbines cost twice as much as turbines onshore. But the wind is twice as good out here, unimpeded by land, so the machines are much more effective. The 91 2.3 megawatt machines in this phase of Horns Rev can produce 209 megawatts, enough to power 200,000 homes for a year. It makes sense. Take the machines away from land, from people, and make them bigger, generate more power. But then some wind developers took a look at their short-term bottom lines, noted that it was costing them more to put the turbines up out here, and you guessed it, they took their huge turbines onshore and put them up close to where people live.
The windmills are just being placed there before these investigations are made.
We have sleep problems.
There's this noise from the wind turbines.
When we get up in the morning, it's like you have been drinking for 2-3 days.
Nobody in Denmark is against windmills. We just want to ensure that we can live safe in our houses.
And I think it's a shame that they are putting out windmills in the way they are doing, because they are spoiling it for the wind industry, because this gives the wind industry a bad reputation.
We had a dream here. It was beautiful for 12 years, and then these turbines came, and that's over.
Denmark used to be the world model for making wind power work. Now, suddenly, there are over 170 anti-wind groups across the country.
The politicians, they don't want to see it because it's against the idea of, making green energy for the people and maybe saving the world from collapsing. That's what we've been told for years. And of course, there's a lot of money involved in this. It's big business.
One turbine is worth 35 million kroner, about 6 million Canadian dollars. Between the political capital and hard currency, the Danes have managed to get 20% of their power from wind. That's crucial because most of the other 80% comes from coal, which has to be imported.
Our government has just decided that we have to produce like 50% of our energy using only wind turbines in 2020. So in the next 8 years, we're going to put up like 900 wind turbines in the 2 megawatt all over the country. In a perfect world, I think it should be at sea. There's where the wind turbine can produce a lot of energy. They can also be put on land, but then they have to be not that close to neighbors.
But they are. Big turbines going up fast near people's houses. In Denmark, the minimum distance between a house and a turbine is equal to 4 times the height of the machine. Some people say that's still not far enough, but the turbine manufacturers claim that the newer, bigger machines will be quieter than the older ones.
They produce just more noise.
Dr. Henrik Møller is a professor at Aalborg University, specializing in acoustics and electrical engineering.
The noise emitted by the turbine is nearly proportional to the electric power that it can produce.
His work has cast doubt on industry claims that larger turbines never exceed legal sound limits. At issue is how they measure the turbine sound.
The wind comes from there, and it's usually measured downwind from the turbine in a distance like this. You have to make sure that when you measure here, you measure all the noise that is emitted from the turbine. If the turbine emits more sound in that direction, perpendicular to the rotor plane, then you won't measure it here. The noise source is up in the air.
But larger turbines don't just make more noise, they also make a different kind of noise.
You get more low frequencies from wind turbines that are larger. If you go inside closed door and windows, there will not be a lot of high frequency noise inside, but the low frequency noise still propagates through windows, through the roof and building structures. A lorry standing next to your house is one of the most common things that people compare it to. It may also sound like an old fridge which you don't like in your kitchen, and therefore you close the door to the kitchen. But if it's a wind turbine, it goes in everywhere, so you can't just close the door. It still is.
Wind turbines are causing noise. Noise is causing people to get annoyed and maybe getting sleep disturbances. And it is known that both annoyance, chronic annoyance, and sleep disturbances can affect the stress hormone levels in a negative way. And if you got stress hormone disturbances over a lot of years, it increases the risk of developing different diseases. For instance, diabetes, hypertension, maybe ischemic heart disease, and maybe even depression.
Denmark is trying a difficult balancing act, finding a way to put up new turbines while keeping them far enough away from houses in a country that doesn't have a lot of space.
And of course you have in Denmark one of the greatest wind turbine companies like Vestas, and they also, the German Siemens, has a lot of employees in Denmark. And they want to show the world that they could put land-based wind turbines up on a great scale. In fact, the CEO from Vestas, he called Denmark a full-scale laboratory for wind turbines in a letter to the Danish environmental minister. It's crazy. It's like treating the Danes as lab rats.
Which brings us back to Ontario. It's gotten to the point where no new wind farm can be planned near a community without provoking vocal opposition. The Ontario and federal governments have commissioned their own studies on the health effects of wind turbines. But it's going to be 2017 before the first of those reports is delivered. Turning to wind to wean the electrical supply off dirty coal and fight climate change seemed the perfect environmental solution.
There was so much social pressure, so much governmental pressure, so much money floating around available for the creation of these industrial wind installations that it seemed that there was almost a gold rush mentality going on, and people rushed head over heels into this.
But in that rush, have the people who live among the wind farms been forgotten?
I think that there are people that are really suffering from having the presence of these windmills all around their homes or around their farms. And whether it's psychological or whether it's really physical, does it really matter? I mean, there are people that are not responding well to it.
If we were given a medication to a person and they were coming with all of these symptoms, the regulators would be saying, stop giving people these medications. In a flash, doctors would be saying, stop taking that medication, it's making you too ill.